welcome to the developer sessions at EGX Res. Thanks very much for coming, and hi to everybody watching on YouTube. I'm Oli Welsh from Eurogamer. Coming up later today, we've got a panel on narrative in games presented by our friends at Rock Paper Shotgun. That's next at 4, and then at 5 o'clock, we've got the results of the Creative Assembly Game Jam, which should be a lot of fun. Today, right now, we're here to celebrate the work of two remarkable British game studios that are both based in Guildford and with a history and a lot of people in common, Bullfrog and Lionhead. Just last month, we heard the sad news that Microsoft was ending development of Fable Legends and going to start the process of closing down Lionhead. So it seemed like a good moment to look back on the story of these two studios. I've got a panel, I'm very lucky to have a panel of 4 guys with me today who, between them, have quite a lot of years at both of the studios. So from left to right, we've got Adam Langridge. He's here with his game Deadbeat Heroes at Res, which you can play downstairs. So Adam did about 10 years-ish at 10, 11 years at Lionhead. We've got John McCormack, who joined Bullfrog in its latter days and then moved on to work on Fable at Lionhead. Glenn Corpse, who was with Bullfrog from the very earliest days, working on games like Populous and Magic Carpet. And at the end, Ben Board, who also joined Bullfrog in its later days and then went on to work on Fable and stay at Lionhead for some time. So I guess we should start at the beginning, and I guess that means with you, Glenn. You were telling me earlier that you reckon you were actually Bullfrog's first actual employee.
Well, arguably I was, because Bullfrog sort of came from a company that had been set up to do business software for the Amiga, and it was kind of not working out. And I was hired. I tried to get a job as a programmer, but I couldn't because they were fully staffed up with 2, and I could draw a little bit, so I got the job of doing the graphics for the first couple of games, and I was because I was the first person to work there that never worked for Taurus, the parent company. I was also the first person to get a pay slip with Bullfrog Productions on it. So by that measure, I was the first employee, but really, I guess I was the 5th or 6th or something.
So what was the studio like in those days?
Well, it was above a hi-fi shop in Guildford. If anyone knows Guildford, there's great big Weatherspoons in the town centre. It's opposite that, and it was the top floor, and it was kind of derelict, and the roofs were all roof-shaped because it was in the loft. And it was we were there for about the first 3 years, and it was the first couple of games we got the. I think between them, the company was paid about £17,000. And it was like it took 3 of us 9 months to do the first one, and 2 of us about 9 months to do the second one. And I was doing the graphics on these and the level design. And this is the port of Druid 2 from the Commodore 64, and then Fusion and Amiga sort of shoot 'em up thing. And I was like, this isn't going to last very long because this isn't bringing in enough money to pay for it. So I dragged my ST in and started playing around with trying to port Fusion to it. Quickly gave up because anyone who's old enough to remember, which is probably none of you lot, it couldn't horizontally scroll, and the game was a 4-way. So I got distracted by trying to rip off a game called Spin Dizzy, which probably nobody remembers either. And when I drew the blocks and slopes and pieces, I thought, how I've got to put these bits together somehow. And rather than write an editor for it, I wrote something that generated a sort of landscape-looking thing. And that was Populous. And the raising and lowering land went in because it just looked like intersecting pyramids and not like any kind of real landscape. So I put this thing in so I could shave the tops off them and make flat areas. And then that was 3 days' work. And then on the Tuesday, it was like, I don't know what we're going to do. I did this thing over the long weekend. I think it was a bank holiday weekend. And like Peter Molyneux took it away and said, that's interesting. And he just went off with it into a room and sort of started putting the game in it. And then from the, and I just carried on drawing the graphics and working on the graphical side of it. And
Populous is presumably changed things quite a lot for the studio.
Oh, there's no way it would have lasted. I mean, while I was doing the initial experiments with it, Peter was adding a programming language to a CAD package because the game thing had almost not worked. And while we were developing Populous, which only took 7 months between 2 of us, I didn't get paid for November until January. You know, it was only because I was still living with my parents that I was able to afford to stay there. I mean, it was very close to not continuing, I imagine. You know.
And then from Populous, what was your next hit after that?
Well, I did the 3D stuff that became Powermonger. Well, I did the Powermonger engine, and then Populous 2, and then pretty much from then on I moved to the PC and was playing around with what eventually became Magic Carpet. But by then, because the graphical standards had gone up so high, I'd had to give up doing artwork, and because I couldn't do artwork, I did a little bit of level design on Syndicate as a sort of, because it's always nice to be doing something other than just banging your head against a debugger as a programmer. So I did a little bit. I basically, going through it all very fast, but I suppose I'm the only one who was working there in those days, so we can't.
Was the studio growing quite fast at that time?
It grew pretty slowly. That was one of the reasons why I think that Bullfrog managed to survive the change from platform to platform, because back in those days it used to seem like most companies would appear on Amiga or on the 8-bits or the Amiga or whatever, and then they'd disappear before they were successful on another platform. And we managed to shift from Amiga first to PC first without much trouble. But I think it's because we grew very, very slowly. I mean, it took about 6 years to get to 40 people, or 6 or 7 years to get to 40 people, and that was a gradual process. And every single person who had any kind of senior job had worked their way up, and it wasn't until just they were staffing up for the EA buyout that people started coming in, at a quicker rate, and then it sort of changed a bit. But
do you think that helped keep the studio's sort of identity and sense of character alive? The fact that it had that core of people that have grown quite slowly.
Yeah, and that it didn't change too fast. Yeah, absolutely. Because when it first started changing a lot, there's one point where we hired loads of graduates for the first time, because I never really went to university, but and neither did one of the guys, Sean Cooper, who wrote the game side of wrote Syndicate and the game side of Magic Carpet. He was a YTS training scheme kid when he started. He was a 17-year-old who'd left school early and was doing it. Started off as a tester, and he's and he went on to be sort of arguably the most senior person at Bullfrog other than Peter. By the time he'd done Syndicate, Magic Carpet, and then he did Dungeon Keeper 2 and stuff. So it was a kind of place you could work your way up through, and then they started hiring graduates, and the first lot it was great because they were absorbed very well, and it was a brilliant time actually, because I actually learnt 3D maths properly when I was in the middle of doing my third 3D game, which was Dungeon Keeper, off of somebody who was 10 years younger than me who just left Cambridge with the first. So it didn't matter that I'd totally failed to pay attention during A-level maths myself, because I was distracted by computers. But yes. It was that first expansion worked really well. It was the kind of later ones, sort of about the time these guys turned up, that were the problem.
So, at what point did EA come on the scene?
It must have been 94, 95 that they bought Bullfrog. Because what was happening is that because the games had been successful, I think, again, I shouldn't be the one saying these things, but we were negotiating better and better deals with EA. So like Populous was something like, we got £1.20 a copy of the 25 quid, raising to about 150 or whatever it was. And then each time, and some money up front, not very much. And then by the time we were talking about Dungeon Keeper and Magic Carpet, we'd made enough money out of Populous and Theme Hospital to not want any upfronts. So we were asking for more and more money, as I understand it. We were asking for more and more money as a royalty. It had got to 6 or 7 quid a copy or something. And at that point, EA just said, "Sod it, we'll buy you." That's probably a simplistic version, but that's how it seemed to work, And EA knew and Bullfrog knew that we were selling to EA. So at that point, the team expanded quite radically, and we had 6 projects in development at once at one point. At the time the EA were buying, most of those came out as well. Even
Was it a big sea change in the studio once EA was on the scene?
Not really. They didn't really interfere because they did have quite a lot of respect for the they bought Bullfrog for a reason. They didn't buy Bullfrog to turn it into some generic EA thing. But what did happen was that because of that, Peter found himself in the States a lot, or in Canada, on the worldwide steering committee. And that's kind of why he wasn't involved with the initial version of Dungeon Keeper so much, which is why when he came back, it was all sort of like, throw it away and start again, which is a story which very few people remember, but that did happen. Yeah, so they didn't really interfere at first, at all. It was only later on when Peter left that they didn't really know what size gap they didn't really know what they had to replace it with. They didn't realise that he only really worked on one game at a time, totally focused on it. And things like, he's gonna hate me for saying this if he ever finds out, but things like Syndicate and Magic Carpet he was barely involved with because he was too distracted with Populous 2, Theme Park and Dungeon Keeper while those games were in development, and that worked. But of course, when he left, EA perceived all kinds of gaps and started bringing in people like the guy that brought John in, and it wasn't that it was anything particularly wrong with it. It's just that's the point where it changed and stopped being the same Bullfrog, I think. Yeah.
So John, this was about it's your fault. This is about the time you joined. How did you find the studio when you joined it?
I loved it because when I was at home on my Amiga, I was completely obsessed with Syndicate and Populous and the early Bullfrog games, and it was my complete ambition to work there. So my route through the kind of story of Bullfrog and Lionhead is akin to a stalker, because I ended up chasing it. And so I worked for Mindscape and then managed to get through the EA door into Bullfrog. And as soon as I got through the EA door and moved into the offices with the Bullfrog guys, I asked to be switched to Bullfrog, and I got to work on the theme park stuff and worked with the guys on Populous 3, I think it was, and Dungeon Keeper 2, and I was like, excellent. And then, but there was you could tell that there was a tiny bit of tension between Electronic Arts and Bullfrog there, just because of the different cultures. Because in one room you had experimental Bullfroggy type stuff happening in one room, and then in the other room you had Formula One and FIFA and that kind of solid stuff that the franchise stuff that the Bullfrog weren't really that much about. And you seen a bit of tension in there, but I was dogged with it, so I kept going, and it was good.
Sorry, at that point, when EA first bought Bullfrog, they left us alone for about 3 years. It was maybe, and then they moved their development people in with Bullfrog. They moved from Slough to Guildford, and so that's about the time that you guys. You say it was still Bullfrog was still going, wasn't it? It was still most of the building when you guys started, but yeah, that was about the time that time. Yeah, that's probably the time when it really changed, when EA moved in. Actually, now I think about it.
Ben, you were telling me earlier that you think you got the job at Bullfrog because of your Quake skills. Is this true?
Because principally. So I remember my interview was I was interviewed as a programmer, so I had lots of technical questions, including guys like Glenn, who was running the coding stuff there, and then we sort of finished that part, and it was lunchtime, and every lunchtime religiously everyone was playing Quake. It's just Quake 1. There was like this game Quake. It was pretty big at the time. Quake 2 is out, but yeah, but we don't play Quake 2. This is all about Quake 1, deathmatch, 320 by 200, DM3. We only needed that one level. It was pretty brutal, and and I seem to remember beating you a little bit, Glenn, a little bit. And I don't actually think my programming skills had very much to do with it. I think that was the thing that got me through the door. And I was the same as John. I mean, Bullfrog were rock stars. I mean, Bullfrog were the greatest British game developer at that time. We could argue about whether one of the greatest ever. And I was playing Populous, and I was to death, and I was playing Dungeon Keeper and Magic Carpet. These were huge to me, and the idea of going to work for Bullfrog was for me, it was like working at NASA. I mean, it was just the greatest thing you can conceive of, to the point that I just didn't think that real people could do that kind of thing. You kind of had to have a letter from the Queen or something that let you go and interview there. So when I eventually got the job, it was incredible.
What do you think made Bullfrog's games special in that way, that got you so excited about them?
What a good question. They were freaking awesome. I mean, there's something very British about Bullfrog games, I think, and Bullfrog. There's something, that kind of mixture of the humour but also the creativity, and there was a feel about those games that just made them unlike anything else. There were very few developers making games like that. You could spot a Bullfrog game from 1,000 yards. They were games that you absolutely loved for 3 levels, and then a lot of people then just said, "Okay, I've done that now. I'm pretty bored of that now." But for those of us who stuck through to the level 20, they were an incredible thing. Yeah, the design behind them was amazing. The kind of feel behind them, the uniqueness, the technology behind them was as good as anybody's. Again, I'm due to men like him. There's just incredible, unique games.
I felt that Bullfrog were always a step ahead in terms of even presentation, the artwork, which is what drew me in, the artwork and animation. The Syndicate and Populous in the early days was just, because on the early computers, the power was so limited, you have to squeeze every pixel with love, and it felt like Bullfrog were all about that, and I was about that, and I wanted to chase it, because they were the best.
So was it the what was it that was really the end of Bullfrog? Was it Peter leaving? Was it the move to the EA offices in Chertsey?
Right. Well, I was around. Hello. So I actually joined Bullfrog and Lionhead. So I went to Bullfrog as my internship at university, and I was really excited to get a placement at Bullfrog. Went for the interview. I was really excited. Looked around, and I was like, "Wow!" And they said, "I think you've got the job," and I was ecstatic. I said, "What game am I going to work on? Is it going to be Populous, or is it another Syndicate?" And they said, "Oh, it's going to be F1 2000 Championship Edition." And I was like, "I don't remember that game." And I was one of the guys over in, the building was the shape of an E in Chertsey, for the EA building. And you had 3 fingers, and I was on one of the fingers, which was the F1 finger at the top. And you might have seen this building, what's the film? Inception, yeah. So it's like the one with the impossible stairwell that goes up and up. And
It didn't actually have that at the time, though, as I remember.
No, they must have put that in after.
No, they added that in after.
I don't remember that bit. And but I would, I'd be beavering away. I made the maps, maps to help the artists. I was basically Google Maps, but before Google Maps was a thing. And I would take little unofficial office tours on my own. I'd wander around the other bits to find Syndicate 3 being made. And I'd just be they'd be working at their desk doing this amazing art, there'd be walls of beautiful art, and there'd be some little oik wandering over, and he'd be like, what are you doing here? "Oh, I just thought I'd see how Syndicate 3's going." And they're like, go back over to F1. And to be honest, I felt like I joined to try and work at Bullfrog, and I never quite did. But what I didn't get at Bullfrog, when I got to work at Lionhead, got back everything I dreamt that Bullfrog would be.
So Lionhead, you feel, was a reincarnation of the spirit of Bullfrog?
I was never at Bullfrog when Bullfrog was Bullfrog. But what I always imagined Bullfrog to be, Lionhead certainly fulfilled that for me. It was pretty incredible. It was quite anarchic, really cool.
Yeah,
really
definitely
cool.
anarchic. That was always my feeling. But again, I joined Bullfrog a year after Peter left. So there was lots of people at Bullfrog at the time who were bemoaning the EA-ness of it all and thinking, oh, you know, the good old days are well past. I had come from a year working in the real world programming. There's this helicopter. This is a real thing. I have the Merlin helicopter, and there's a little map display in it. And if you ever find yourself in a Merlin helicopter, on the map display, if you see the straight lines, I did that. So I'd done that, and then I went to Bullfrog and found people complaining about how it was better last year. And I was trying to. I found it fairly easy to explain to people that actually it was pretty good. Just even now, you know, where, there's just these crazy people walking around. You see the people like the Carters, the Simon Dean Carter, who's just like, and Sean Cooper, who's an incredible personality. All of these incredible people, and so different to anything I'd experienced before. And that spirit, that anarchic spirit, was really tangible. And I, as you know, I only heard about the kind of Bullfrog a few years previously from some of the older hands, but I felt like a lot of the kind of components of that spirit were absolutely there at my time at Lionhead later on.
Absolutely. There was, I should mention a guy called Mark Adami, and he told me this fantastic story when he was at Bullfrog, and he was working, I think it was on one of the syndicates, and he was making the map editor, and the guy who used the map editor was, I don't know who it was, I hope it wasn't you, Spencer. Apparently Spencer was quite a straight, you know, bit of a misery, and what Mark Adami did to cheer him up is he made the save function for the map editor work like track and field. So if you wanted to save the level, you have to go save, harder and harder, as a bar would feel, and he would be there going, "I hate Mark Adami."
He also made. I remember him making one of the map editors some kind of insult to one of the guys who was using it, and if you tried to change the name of it, it would refuse to run until you changed the name back to what it. Or DOS program.
So in the early days of Lionhead, we had Black and White, which was a game I think that was very identifiable as a game with a Bullfrog lineage. But then Fable came together, and that was something a little bit different because it came from a satellite studio where I think you worked, Ben, and you as well, John.
Yeah, it was. I started the Big Blue Box. That was as I say, a stalker type mentality where Bullfrog were breaking apart, and EA, and I think at that point the Bullfrog logo had been taken down and it had gone, and Bullfrog had ceased to exist. So I noticed Lionhead across there, and there was also Big Blue Box, the satellite studio, and I knew the guys there, and so I applied there, and we started working on Fable in conjunction with Lionhead, but it was the satellite thing, and working as an artist and animator on that, and you know, as soon as Microsoft started to look at Fable, because they thought Fable, at the time it was called Project Ego, they thought it was a Lionhead game, but it was actually a Big Blue Box game, and they were really interested in it, and ended up with Lionhead buying Big Blue Box, and always becoming one big team, and so we were back to the kind of Bullfrog days, but working on a game that had been at the start, and it was. Fable was an amazing experience at Lionhead. That was incredible. It was, 12 years I was on Fable. Eventually became the art director on Fable 2 and 3. And it was anarchic. It was like, you know, the Bullfrog thing and the Lionhead thing were almost like the punk rock version of development. And that's where the tension with EA came, because they were a bit more seen as the corporate side.
But then Microsoft as well gets involved.
Well, the
Fable.
Microsoft thing was interesting because we were the first. We started Fable, and you know the Xbox hadn't even been built yet, so we got involved very early in the Xbox stage. But Microsoft are kind of at that early stage. They were completely naive about the games industry. You know, on consoles, because, you know, you had the PlayStation. We'd all worked on PlayStation before and things like that, and we were seen as the experts. And Microsoft went, you know, what we're going to do is we're going to help fund Fable, but we're not going to have anything to do with the development. And they stuck with that. It was actually a pretty good experience, because Lionhead were in complete control of the first Fable, and Microsoft stood back and watched and took notes.
Ben, what was your experience at that time?
Yeah, so I joined Big Blue Box. This was this company run by Tim and Dean Carter, who had been luminaries at Bullfrog, and some other people. So I joined there in about 2002 or something. And so this was an era when the kind of first round of the new consoles, Xbox One, whatever we call the first Xbox now, was just, as John says, was just about sort of soon to appear, and I think that was an opportunity for some of the incredible talent, and there's just genuinely amazing people to bring what they could do to this new platform. But at that time, there was a lot to learn. We were going from smaller PC games from the previous generation console, where everything was a bit more contained. Suddenly, like, everything goes up by a factor of 10, and platform transitions like that, as you may, those of you who study the history of these things, platform transitions are really, really hard, because suddenly you can do so much more. You have to rewrite everything. You have to start from scratch in a lot of areas, and suddenly you've got this physically bigger space to fill with stuff. And I think Lionhead found that hard Lionhead and Big Blue Box, and all of us found it hard to know how to be disciplined about that, because the kind of Bullfrog mentality that had spawned all of these games, and had spawned Project Ego as it was at the time, and when I remember going to my interview at Big Blue Box and just seeing Project Ego as it was at the time, and my jaw literally dropping. I had never seen anything as good as this. I mean, principally due to you, and some of the other amazing artists there, and the engine programs and so on. But so that was an amazing start for that project, and it became clear, my view of it, this is my perspective over those couple of years, that we had a lot of ideas, loads of proper Bullfroggy kind of ideas, and lots of tech, but the difficulty that we were finding was trying to keep it heading in one direction. And my memory of Microsoft is after Big Blue Box kind of got subsumed into Lionhead, and we started working on it kind of full-blown production. I remember Microsoft coming in and helping us sort of grab it by the scruff of the neck. This is Fable 1, and sort of say, right, this is going to be huge. This is going to be one of the biggest games you all will have ever made, and it's going to be a huge success. But we have to kind of bring this discipline, and they did bring that discipline. They brought resources. They brought huge amounts of QA and awesome producers, and really helped get it out the door and to make it what it was. And you know, it started just before the first Xbox came out, and we just about snuck in before at the end of the Xbox's life, before Xbox 360 came out. It was an amazing. That was an amazing. It was an amazing
the launch
experience.
of Fable 1 was crazy, because it's a weird game. It's just really weird, you know. And there's a bunch of weirdos making it. You know, and we were all kind of sitting in that wee office in Godalming, and it was next to a canal that was a dead end, and we just used to sit and watch canals crash, and people would like go help, and we were like, this is brilliant, and just get on with it. And we would all sit there and just there was no, as I said before, Microsoft, and there was no discipline. The whole thing with Fable was, I've got an idea for a creature. All right, then build it. All right, I'll animate it then. And then it was in the game, you know, and people were just making stuff up, and it was going in the game, which is crazy way to develop it. There was no producers. It was just, you know, it was mental, but it was a hell of a lot of fun. But the idea that was going to make it out in the world, you know, because especially with the Xbox being an American console, you know, the player base is mostly in America. We thought this weird British quirky thing that we're going to send out there, nobody's going to like this, and Americans loved it.
So went on to spawn a successful series. Microsoft eventually bought Lionhead, and that didn't really mean the end of crazy experiments there. Adam, you worked in R&D at Lionhead, didn't you, for a while?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you worked on some crazy stuff, including Milo and Kate?
Milo and Kate. Yes, yeah, that was, I mean, there was a load of amazing, like really ahead of their time ideas at Lionhead. I remember so there was BC, and that was a satellite, and that was a game about surviving in the wilderness as a caveman surrounded by dinosaurs and building a tribe. And that sounds like a game that you could go out and buy today, this year.
Yeah.
It was like, that was a really solid idea. There was a lot of games which were about growing up as well, and almost like the game equivalent of high school movies. And there were some beautiful ideas in there. And I got to work on Milo and Kate's on a lot of the Connect side of it, which I got to do some R&D on. And that was a game that unfortunately never got finished, but I did get to take it on a little tour to Microsoft. And we got it to a point where there was an introduction in a sequence where you made friends with this boy, and you were like a ghost or a spirit or his imaginary friend, or I still don't know what you were. But we had this, this first level done to the point where it worked so well that we would be bringing people in. We went to Microsoft, and we would kind of bring a few people in, and they'd play the game, and then they'd cry, and then they'd say, "Oh, I never thought you could do that, with a game." And then they'd go, and then we were there a little bit longer than we expected because there was a volcano eruption and all the flames got plugged up or something. And because we stayed there a little bit longer, these guys kept bringing their friends in as well. So a 2-show visit turned into an extended week-long visit where people started just appearing. We didn't even know who these people were from Microsoft. Would come in, play the game, cry, leave, and then tell their mates as well. So it was a bit of a rock tour, to be honest.
So why didn't it make it in the end?
I still don't really know. I think some of the ideas, I think, were a bit ahead of their time. And to be honest, I think with the indie scene now, a lot of this, if someone had pitched something like Milo and Kate now, they'd be like, yeah, sure, that would settle right. And someone's imaginary friend, brilliant. That would find a market these days. But I think it was, to be honest, just a bit too far ahead.
Right. I think, as I say, at Lionhead weird games were getting made, and the weird decisions, and that was making it interesting. And I think Milo and Kate was maybe just a bit too weird for people.
Yeah. There was another game. There was another game which was it called Survivors? As well? And this was, around 2005, I think. And it was a post-apocalyptic game about surviving with your family or finding a team of people to survive. And this was before The Walking Dead got onto telly, and before The Last of Us. And in there was new climbing mechanics that I have only ever seen in Assassin's Creed since. And there was some social stuff as well. And some of the games that weren't actually released at Lionhead, you can make today now, they would fit right in.
Same in Bullfrog. That was something that characterised my years there was the games that didn't make it. There was hundreds of them, and I worked on some of them, and to some degree or another. And there was Bullfrog had this thing about creation, games called Creation. How many different games called Creation were there?
Well, Creation was the working title of Populous until the very end.
Right, and then Creation was the working title of at least 2 or 3 other things, that never made it past the working title stage. And you worked on Indestructibles, and which is the big superhero thing, which was looking really, really good until Marvel and DC and whatever made you realise that doing a superhero game was very, very hard because they snaffled all the...
That was funny. Somebody from EA in the States said, "Why haven't you spoken to Marvel if you're doing a superhero game?" So we begrudgingly spoke to Marvel, and they came back saying, "Here's a list of 1,000 characters we own. If any of your characters are like these, you might want to reconsider it." We didn't even bother looking at the list. The game got canned a few months later. But yeah, so that was that.
But again, that was giant 3D open world, destructible buildings, mechanics that turn up in games years later. But
it was going to be about patrolling the rooftops and getting to know your. So I wanted it to feel like playing multiplayer Quake, in that you're sort of you know the area. It's not about seeing this bit of the game once and going down this. It was going to be about. It's very hard to tell sort of.
Yeah. But there's
things that nebulous as an idea.
But there's that
internally within EA, it was in '98 anyway. Yeah.
Guys, we could talk for hours on this. Unfortunately, we need to wrap it up. There's one question I want to put to you all before we stop. Now that we know that Lionhead is very likely going to close, how do you feel about that? And how do we go about preserving what made those studios great, their culture and their games in the British games industry?
I would say that first of all, it's incredibly sad that it's happening, because that's a great British, that whole Bullfrog, Lionhead, and what Peter had created was an amazing pillar in the gaming community. But the positive side to it is that when Bullfrog went down, you had Lost Toys and Mucky Foot, and you had all the satellites come off it and Big Blue Box and stuff. And then when Lionhead, as it was going, it spawned Media Molecule, and it spawned really great companies. And when I look at stuff like what happened to BlackRock in Brighton, the Disney studio, when that shut down, it spawned like 9 or 10 small indies that all had the creative thing. And I'd be pretty excited about what happens if Lionhead could, close, because you're going to see that energy and that craziness that was that studio that's been pent up for a long time, populate the indie scene, I hope.
I mean, there's a lot of people at Bullfrog have gone on to do amazing things. There's the Bullfrog alumni pop up all over the shop and doing it, running this, that, or the other. Think of Jonty Barnes, who runs the production at Bungie, and
also Demis Hassabis.
Demis Hassabis.
Yeah, Demis was 16.
So Demis Hassabis, who wrote Theme Park with Peter, and Demis, I don't know if you've been hearing on the news recently about this Go playing computer, right? Like the computer that beat, yeah.
That's the company.
So the company DeepMind, that's Demis. Demis is the brain the size of a planet. There's many of these people, but Bullfrog, yeah, I think Bullfrog is the thing I'm proudest of having been a part of in my time. Lionhead and Bullfrog really as a unit, and I think that spirit has spread around the industry in the UK and beyond. And I like to think that in my work now in my studio, I try and bring some of what made Bullfrog special. And I would also say, I've just spent 2 hours walking around here, and I'm seeing games that you guys and the guys who are making these games absolutely are keeping the spirit of Bullfrog alive. This is some of the stuff we were trying to do at the time. Some of the things that we would have been doing back in the day if we'd had the chance, and if the world then had Steams and iOS, and we could put these games out. I think the spirit of Bullfrog is alive and well in the UK games industry, and it's very good to see.
That's a perfect note to end on. So I just need to say thank you very much to Adam, John, Glenn, and Ben, and thank you all for coming.
You can see the biggest developers live and play a huge range of unreleased games at EGX 2016 in Birmingham from the 22nd to the 25th of September. The UK's biggest games event is going even bigger this year, with more space and more screens to make it our best ever. Play this year's hits first, see developers live, and check out the spectacular cosplay stage, gigantic retro selection, plus sessions and talks on getting into the games industry.